we are going to wrap up our discussions of learning today, specifically by taking just a small, in-depth look into observational learning, how it happens, why it happens. So today's focus is going to be on the research that was kind of pioneered by a man named Albert Bandura. So in order to get into that, first we got to talk about what observational learning is. It is exactly as it sounds. The problem is you can't just say, well, it's when we learn by observing someone. You've got to be able to explain what those two concepts mean within that definition. You can't use the term in your explanation. So, learning is a relatively permanent change in a person's behavior due to experience. And the observational part is purely by watching or viewing, then imitating another. So those are those components, watching and then imitating. That's what we mean when we say observational learning, okay? Research that's been carried out on this in multiple different facets. You can see it best in the development of learning through monkeys in various different research patterns. You can see that the monkey on the left right here, he is watching this other monkey over through the glass panel, and he's watching how he carries out certain activities on this computer or TV screen. And so the monkey on the left follows that exact pattern in order to get the reward that is going to be coming at the very tail end of that. So observational learning can, to some extent, involve operant conditioning in the fact that there is a reward or a punishment. However, at the end of the day, the key differentiation is that observational learning involves you viewing what another person does and then watching what happens to them, and then as a result imitating that behavior. So Albert Bandura is the guy that kind of, as I said, pioneers this research. And according to him and his theories, observational learning happens in 4 distinct stages. The first is that you pay attention and you basically take a look at and perceive aspects of another person's behavior. So this is where you are very much in that kind of observational stage of watch and take in what's happening. The second stage is remembering that behavior, okay, keeping it in mind when it comes to various different scenarios you find yourself in. Third stage then is to reproduce that behavior, which leads to step 4, which is being motivated to learn and carry it out, especially if there is a reward attached to it. And his research with the Bobo doll that we're going to talk about in a second is very much an aspect of that. If there is a reward or a reinforcer attached to a behavior, we will be much more likely to carry out observational learning. And many of you guys can attest to that. If you have older siblings and you saw that they were rewarded for getting good grades, for example, you would be more inclined toward following in that exact same behavior because you saw the reinforcement being carried out for your older sibling. So, Banduras experiment, the part that is the most significant is the Bobo doll experiment. And we're actually going to take a look at some video of this experiment so you can see the results of it, because it was pretty eye-opening. In 1961, Bandura set up this Bobo doll experiment where he had adults videotaped beating up this blow-up clown doll named Bobo, okay, and he would have them carry out certain activities. This woman right here, for example, you'll see in the video that we show you that, she steps over the Bobo doll and she just pounds it and she knocks it over and she does all of these kinds of aggressive actions towards it. Now, there are 2 separations to this video. In one set of the video, for the control group, there's no special treatment afterwards. The woman just, beats up on the Bobo doll, but there's no reward or reinforcement attached to it. And that is what is showed to the control group of children. Now, in the experimental group of children, because the entire point of this is for Bandura to take a look at how significant observational learning plays a role in childhood and developmental behaviors. They put in the experimental group, they have this woman being videotaped, but at the end of carrying out these violent acts towards the Bobo clown doll, she is rewarded for certain behaviors. So when the kids watched the adults being rewarded for that aggression, they acted aggressively in a room where there was a Bobo doll. So they watched, they observed what that adult did, they saw the reward, and then once the children were left alone to play with that doll, with Bobo, they copied down to the mannerism where this woman here carried out her aggressive acts. So basically, it's monkey see, monkey do. Mimic what you observe. Okay, and that was what the research showed. And this is Susie right here, down at the bottom. You've heard me reference Susie before. Susie has a hammer in her hands, okay, and she has it holding it up over her head to beat the bejesus out of that poor Bobo doll, okay, because the kids saw if they carried out that violent action, they would be rewarded for it, and they assumed that they would be because that's what happened for the adult. So this is where Banduras research leads to that credence that we do very much emphasize models of behavior, that we will watch what happens to others and we will follow in kind as a result. And so much of the application of Banduras research shows that where good news is concerned, prosocial models, so positive, what's perceived by society to be good and moral and upstanding, they are good at having prosocial effects as models. So if we observe those individuals, we are more likely to carry out and model those exact behaviors. On the downside to this, and this is where it is being particularly heavily emphasized in our day and age, is that because of Banduras studies, we do very much know that antisocial models found in family members right around your neighborhood, if you grow up in a bad area, for example, TV or movies or video games, just the media in general, they have some level of antisocial effects that oftentimes people who are developing in terms of their adolescence, and these are the things that they're witnessing and that they're familiar with, to them it seems normal to operate on those actions. And so they have a tendency to behave in antisocial manners because the models that they are mimicking behave antisocially. And you can see that through this piece of descriptive research here. Gentile found that in their research, you, between the age of 5 and 15, you as an average child, so this is just the average. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's the overall amount specifically that you yourself have been exposed to. On average, you watch on TV 13,000 violent deaths in a 10-year span. That is a very significant total of violent imagery that is presented to children that are growing and developing and learning to act on certain behaviors. And they found that elementary school-going children that were exposed to violent TV and video games and movies, they ended up acting on increasingly aggressive behaviors. So purely because that was what they were exposed to, they perceived that as being normal. And so as a result, they would act on that aggressive tendency. So this is going to be a situation that we are going to discuss pretty heavily in depth, because it's a very important thing to take a look at. Why is it that some children will, because they are exposed to this large amount, operate on these aggressive tendencies, and some who are still exposed to this high level won't? So we want to get a look at that and kind of critically analyze that. So that's what we'll be doing in class as we follow into this. But at the end of the day, it is important to note, we don't necessarily imitate everything we see. We do have this ability to rationalize and to look at things logically, but we are more likely to imitate certain scenarios or certain people than others. If we perceive someone to be similar to us, we will mimic or act on behaviors that those people act on themselves. Okay, so we'll model their behavior. We're also more likely to mimic those who we perceive as being admirable or successful. So if you look at rap culture in particular, initially when rap and hip-hop was really starting to gain a foothold in the late 80s, early into the 90s, and as it's progressed into something that is particularly popular now, much of the background toward rap music is this growing up in very, very unpleasant circumstances and rising to the top to becoming successful artists. And so we often find that people have a perception towards that because they are able to get out of bad circumstances, become successful monetarily, and so people end up wanting to mimic those kinds of behaviors as well. Behaviors that are being reinforced rather than punished are also going to be mimicked. If you know you're going to get in trouble for a behavior, and if you were to fall in line with an older brother or an older sister who broke curfew, and you knew you would do the same thing and a punishment would be attached to it, you're not as likely to go into and act on that learned behavior because you know that there's going to be a negative consequence attached to it. But if you know at the end of the day you're going to be rewarded for a behavior and that it'll be reinforced, you'll be much more likely to follow in on it. Finally, we are more inclined toward modeling the behaviors of someone whose actions and words are consistent. So by that we mean they're not hypocritical. They don't do one thing and then say the complete opposite, or they don't say something and then act on the complete opposite of what they say. That's not to say, though, that we don't model those who are hypocritical, because even though we're more likely to follow someone who is consistent in action and word, it doesn't mean we won't observe and learn and model off of those who are hypocritical. If we're exposed to hypocrisy, more than likely we will still model some level of those actions and repeat the words. So we will, to some extent, model that hypocrisy as well. So these are the observational learning notes. Please let me know if you have any questions.